Welcome to another week of the Rebbe's Lens, a weekly webcast exploring the Rebbe's perspective on life. I want to open today's webcast by wishing you all a good Yom Tif. You may notice that I'm wearing Shabbos or holiday attire, and that's because today on the Hasidic calendar is a Yom Tif. It is a holiday. It is known as Yud Tes Kislev, or the 19th day of the month of Kislev, and we'll talk a lot more about this in just a moment. But I want to start off by wishing you all the customary greeting. Good Yom Tif, L'shana Teva, B'limud Achsidus, U'B'darkei Achsidus, Tekaseva V'Seichasemu. May you be written and inscribed for a good year in Hasidism, the new year of Hasidism, both in the learning of Hasidism and in acting in a way that Hasidism encourages us to act. So on that note, let me give you a little bit of background about what today is. Today, the 19th day of the month of Kislev, is known as the Rosh Hashanah, or the new year for Hasidism. And while there's a historical background to this, the Alter Rebbe was released from prison on this day. He was arrested in the 18th century on suspicions of counter-revolutionary activity, particularly because the opponents of Hasidism had told or exaggerated things that he had done to the government. In Hasidic tradition, we usually don't talk that much about the actual story. Of course, we talk about the story, but we talk more about what happened on a spiritual level. And for this, I'd like to share a story of the Alter Rebbe from when he was just a student. It was the time of the Maggid of Mezrich. So a little historical context for those of you that can use it. The Baal Shem Tov, Rebbe Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, was the founder of Hasidism. And 2 generations later, the Alter Rebbe, whose day we're celebrating, we're commemorating today, is he founds Chabad Hasidism. And we'll talk soon in just a moment what the difference between those are. But in between them, there was a Rebbe who was known as the Maggid of Mezrich, or the preacher from the city of Mezrich. And they tell the story that during his time, there was a big gezerah, there was a big decree in heaven about the fact that he was spreading the wellsprings of Hasidism. Hasidism is built on Kabbalah and represents the mystical parts of the Torah. And they say that there was a big decree, so much so that from heaven they could have put a stop to the whole thing. And it was the Alter, and this whole thing was sparked by an episode that occurred whereby a handwritten piece of Hasidism, in other words, a paper that had some of these mystical thoughts in the Torah written on it, was floating around on the floor. And so in heaven, there were those that said that if this is what happens when Hasidism gets revealed to the public, then maybe it's not worth it. Maybe it's just being corrupted by being sent down into the material world. And it was the Alter Rebbe, who at that time was only a disciple of the Mesilat Maggid, that told the following parable. He said that when a king once had an only son, and when that son fell ill, and they brought doctors from across the land, and there was no way for them to find any cure, there was one doctor who said, "There's one cure." He told the king, "There's one cure that I can guarantee you will work, but it comes at a great cost, and that is you have to take the Even Shebekeser HaMelech, you have to take the stone, the most precious stone that there is in the crown of the king. You have to grind it up, mix it with water, and pour it over the prince's lips." And the prince was unconscious at the time, and his lips were closed. V'kula hai v'ulai, as the Gemara puts it. The Gemara Chagiga uses this term, v'kula hai v'ulai. All of this will be done. In other words, you'll grind up the ulai, so that just there's a chance, maybe a little bit of this liquid, of this elixir, together with the precious stone of the king inside it, will make it into the parched lips of the prince, and then he will wake up and it will heal him. And it was this parable, based on the fact that the Jewish people had been decimated. They were parched, they were unconscious, both from the Khmelnytsky pogroms that had happened at the time, from the false messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, for those that are aware of the historical context, also from the fact that there was this division forming within Judaism itself between the scholarly elite and the simple masses who didn't necessarily even know how to read, they were uneducated. And the Baal Shem Tov with Hasidism and the Mesilat Maggid, his successor, came and they revitalized this, and that's why they were spreading the wellsprings of Hasidus everywhere, so that even if just a drop of it will go into the Jewish people's mind, into the consciousness, the collective consciousness of the Jewish people, then it will rouse the Jewish people from their slumber. And so 1 generation later, when the Alter Rebbe came on the scene, and he founded what we call Chabad Hasidism, and again, more on that in just a moment, and more specifically with his beginning of the spreadings of his work, which later became known as the Tanya. It was originally put out in small booklets. It was a continuation of conversations that he had in private audiences with people, and encouraging them in their service of the Almighty. There was similarly a decree. And Yud Tes Kislev, this whole story with the arrest of the Alter Rebbe and the subsequent release of the Alter Rebbe on Yud Tes Kislev, it was 53 days in total that he was imprisoned, was a similar story unfolding, spiritually speaking. There was a decree from on high. Is this a good idea or is this not a good idea? The fact that Hasidism is being revealed to the masses in public, on all sorts of levels, with all sorts of parables, and all sorts of ways that people can relate to it with their own intellect. Is this a good idea or is it not? Continue, close the door, please. Thank you. Is this a good idea or is it not? And so much so that we have a tradition amongst Chabad Hasidim that while the Alter Rebbe was in prison, he was visited by the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich. And lest you think, I was telling the story to my son last night at the dinner table, and he said, "Oh, we mean their souls came." And I said, "No, the previous Rebbe once visited the cell where the Alter Rebbe was, and he measured to see if they can fit. Somehow, whatever sort of revelation this was, it was also physical. It was spiritual. Their souls came, but also enclosed in bodies of some sort. And the Alter Rebbe asked them, should I stop? When I am released from prison, should I stop spreading the well springs of Chassidus? Is this a sign from above that this is not a good idea?" And they told him, no. At the point that you came this far, actually the opposite is true. And we see a marked shift from before the Alter Rebbe was arrested. The Chassidus that he shared then was like these short, concise ideas. They were known as Maimarim Kitzarim, short discourses, to afterwards when the Alter Rebbe would share much more. After, first of all, the printing of the Tanya, of course, was afterwards. And all of this came about because of this 2-day holiday, Yud Tes Kislev and Chav Kislev. Why a 2-day holiday? There's many reasons. One of the reasons is because the Alter Rebbe was released on the 19th day of Kislev, and the 20th day of Kislev commemorates, among other things, the fact that that was the day of the printing of the Tanya. Which brings us to the topic of today's lesson, which is the study of Tanya. Is the study of Tanya for me? Or is it something maybe that I don't relate to it? It's not something that I can get on board with. It's too esoteric for me, and I shouldn't be studying Tanya. So I think you already know the answer is going to be a resounding yes. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to explore a couple of letters. This is a class called the Rebbe's Lens. It's all about learning the Rebbe's perspective from letters and correspondence that the Rebbe had with different people. What I'd like to do is explore a few different letters of the Rebbe on this topic of learning Tanya. Is it relevant for me? Somebody who complains I don't relate to Tanya, and you'll see the lengths to which the Rebbe goes to show him that yes, you do relate to Tanya. Tanya is relevant to you, etc. But I'm going to open in a little bit of an untraditional way by reading a letter not of the Rebbe. Even though this is the Rebbe's Lens, I hope you'll forgive me if I'm going to share a letter of the 5th Chabad Rebbe known as the Rebbe Rashab. It is the opening of Hayom Yom, for those of you that are familiar with the book Hayom Yom, and it is printed in the Hayom Yom under today's entry for the 19th day of Kislev. The Rebbe quotes this letter from the Rebbe Rashab, where the Rebbe Rashab writes as follows: the 19th of Kislev, the festival on which he redeemed our soul in peace, and our soul's illumination and vitality were given to us. This day is Rosh Hashanah for Chassidus, bequeathed to us by our sacred forebears, identical with the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. This day, the Rebbe Rashab quotes a verse from the Torah. This day is the beginning of your works. Zeh hayom tchilat ma'asecha. The fulfillment of the true intention behind the creation of man on earth, which is to call forth revelation of the light of the inward part of our holy Torah. On this day, the light is called forth in a general way for the entire year, and it is our duty on this day to awaken our hearts with an innermost elemental desire and will in the very core of our heart that God illuminates our souls with the light of his inner Torah. And the Rebbe Rashab continues by quoting another verse. Mima'amakim kirasicha Hashem. From the depths I call to you, O God, to elicit the depth and inwardness of God's Torah and God's mitzvot from the inwardness and essence of the infinite, may he be blessed, to illuminate the inwardness of our souls, that all our being, meaning our total existence, the essence, and the extensions be devoted to him alone, to banish from within us any of the natural traits that are evil and unworthy. Instead, all our works and affairs, our avoda, meaning davening and Torah and mitzvot, and our worldly undertakings necessary for the maintenance of the body, be with sincere intention for the sake of heaven as God wishes. May God, the merciful Father, have compassion upon us and lead us along the good and righteous path, and may we see his face in uprightness. If this letter doesn't tell us what Yud Tes Kislev is all about, what this holiday is all about, I don't know what does. Chassidus is known as the Lichtigkeit and Warmkeit, the light, the Oyer v'chayas nafshenu, the light and life of our souls. And so I want to wish you all a good Yom Tif, and let's dive into what exactly we're going to learn about today when it comes to the Tanya. So, of course, the Tanya, which is known as the Torah Shebichtav, or the Bible of Hasidism, is where the Alter Rebbe literally outlines his ideas. Any ideas you're familiar with from the Alter Rebbe? The fact that we have two souls, a godly soul and an animal soul. The fact that we can make a home for God in this world. Dira b'tachtonim. That our collective mission here on this earth is to make a home for God on this world. These come from chapters in the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe's approach to anything really, but negative emotions, which is very famous. How we wrestle with depression or anxiety or guilt that we feel. All of these things are discussed in the Tanya. And I want to encourage every single one of you, even before we dive into the letters of the Rebbe, to take upon yourself, in addition in studying Tanya or Hasidism as a whole, but Tanya in particular. There's so many books out there today. If I can recommend some of them, this one is by Rabbi Yadin Eben Yisrael Steinsaltz. Obviously a translation of the Tanya into Hebrew, but also with his own adaptations, and he explains it beautifully. Another one of my personal favorites, is from Rabbi Chaim Miller. You can see all the bookmarks of the different people that I study Tanya with on a weekly basis inside it. Also, beautifully laid out English translations alongside the Hebrew, and you can take lots of lessons from it. And if Hebrew is your native, not native, but if you can learn in Hebrew, there's a recently published Tanya. It's 2 volumes, and this is called the Tanya Hashalim. This is a Tanya that actually has the commentary of our Rebbes around it, all around it, all the ideas that the Alter Rebbe began to express in the late 1700s, and that our Rebbes expounded upon in the 250 years since, are all collected here around the margins of it, like that you can study the Tanya, have any sources that the Tanya is quoting right here at your fingertips, and all of this explanation from all of these Rebbes here, along with a running commentary that's taken originally from the Shiurim B'Sefer Tanya, for those that are familiar. So this is another wonderful Tanya. Honestly, these are not the only 3. These are just 3 that I highlighted that I had here in my office. So I want to encourage you to study Tanya. Let's dive into some of the letters that we have today. Let's see if I can share my screen. Hold on. Please hold. I see it's giving me options to share. This is my first time trying to actually share the screen. So let me see if we can share just the window that has in it here. This should do it. I hope so. Yeah. Seems perfect. Brings me down to the corner of the screen, and you can see this. Let me see if I can somehow not bring the words. Okay, either way, hopefully this is as good as we can get for now. Afterwards, I'll watch the recording. We'll see how good it is, and we'll improve it for next week. By the way, as usual, a brief reminder that if you subscribe to the emails, then you will get an email from me each week before we go live, what the topic is, along with a PDF of the letters that we are going to be reading. And so if you'd like to subscribe to that email alert, you can go to PasadenaJewishAcademy.com/lens. And you can register for the class, and then you'll get, it's free of charge to register, and then you'll get these emails each week. Okay, let's open with our first letter, shall we? I don't relate to Tanya. This is a letter, by the grace of God, from the 24th day of the month of Shvat, from Tavshin Yud Gimel, from 5713, which is the English equivalent of 1953, Brooklyn, New York. The Rebbe writes as follows: Greeting and blessing. I have received your letter of the 6th of Shvat, in which your bewilderment at not finding anything to take out from the Shir of Tanya, although you have already reached chapter 18. Let me clarify. The Shir of Tanya means that there is a well-known custom. In fact, most Tanyas have on the side, on the margins of them, they have what day of the year this Tanya is for, because there's an annual cycle, which obviously begins today on the 19th day of Kislev and ends on yesterday. In which you learn a little bit of Tanya each day. In the course of 12 months or 13 months on a leap year, you finish the entire Tanya. And this individual had apparently been studying the daily portion of Tanya. He was already holding chapter 18, but he was bewildered because he wasn't finding the Tanya to be relevant to him in any way. Says the Rebbe, I am greatly surprised that you cannot follow the Shir, although, as you state, the Rabbi explains it well. So it seems that this person was actually attending a shir, a class, where someone was actually explaining the Tanya, and he's doing a good job of explaining it. But still, somehow, this person doesn't seem to be able to follow it. It doesn't seem to be able to be taking any relevance from it. Says the Rebbe, no doubt this is the result of interference by the Yetzer. Now, this is not automatically the Rebbe's response. The Rebbe doesn't always say it's the evil inclination that's stopping you from paying attention. Sometimes it's the topic. Often the Rebbe encourages people, for example, a person should always study Torah in an area of Torah that they find passionate, that they find passion in, that they're excited about. If you're not getting excited by a certain part of Torah, it's okay to switch to another part of Torah. But apparently when it comes to Tanya, there's a different approach. No. Says the Rebbe, the reason you're not finding relevance to it is because your Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination, is putting up a fight. You're also right, he says, that something tells you that the Tanya is only for tzaddikim. Says the Rebbe, this is wrong, of course. For apart from the fact that the very name itself, Sefer Shel Beinonim, which is the book for in-betweeners, the book for intermediate people, clearly defines itself. It is also explained in the Hakdama. Hakdama means the introduction to the Tanya. And in chapter 17, as well as in other places, that it is intended for all. The best proof is in the fact that all those who have studied Tanya, not allowing their Yetzer Hara to hinder them, have benefited so much as to be completely transformed. Let me explain what the Alter Rebbe talks about in his introduction to the Tanya, and then again in chapter 17. Okay, so let's start with his introduction to the Tanya. In his introduction to the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes that the Tanya is made up of letters and essays that he's writing as a continuation of conversations that he had, in the words of the Alter Rebbe, with people that I know and that I recognize and I know well, that have had conversations with me about the internal matters of their heart. The Tanya, at this point already, when there's an introduction, it's already being published as the Tanya. The Tanya is a collection of essays that he had written to these people and for these people in order to encourage them. And the Alter Rebbe spills a lot of ink at the introduction to talk about the fact that there's a special blessing that's made from a Jewish perspective that shows us the diversity that there is among humanity, that every single person relates to different things in different ways, and that every person sees different things, and a book is not the same as having a private audience with the Rebbe, and the conversations they have with the Rebbe are certainly much more effective. And the Alter Rebbe goes on to explain that he put in painstaking efforts to make sure that the Tanya is written in such a way that everybody should be able to relate to it. And then he even goes on to explain that if you don't, and if there's some way that it's not working for you, you can talk to a rabbi, you make sure you're at a class where somebody who's more knowledgeable in the Tanya than you can help guide you through it. It's, in other words, there's allowed to be an oral tradition surrounding the Tanya, but, says the Alter Rebbe, you will find everything you need in here. In other words, the Alter Rebbe goes to great pain to explain to us that the Tanya is actually written for every single individual. Now, and the Alter Rebbe continues on this theme in chapter 17, talking about that it's for Beinonis, not just for tzaddikim. Okay. Now to your specific point, right? The Rebbe is going to address the specific point of the person who said it's not relevant. And this is why I find this letter so fascinating. This is why I chose this letter as the main letter for today's exploration. As to your complaint, says the Alter Rebbe, that you have found nothing to take out from the Tanya, I will point out some lines which are obviously full of meaning. And now the Rebbe gives a few examples. Number one, for example, in chapter 6 on page 20, in the 10 lines from the 7th to the 17th, literally, the Rebbe is giving you 10 lines to explore. You will find enough material to occupy your mind for hours and days. Okay? So now it's time for us to go and explore this. So thank God this beautiful publication has put it all here for us. In chapter 6, the Alter Rebbe, so we're going to note number 12, right? So I'm actually going to open it up in the Tanya if that's okay. So please hold with me. Okay, here we go. So we're in the middle of chapter 6, and the Alter Rebbe has just introduced something called klipa. Okay, so klipa means the forces of negativity. It's the source of your animal soul, etc. And the Alter Rebbe is talking about how he actually starts off the chapter quoting a verse from Ecclesiastes, which says, that Hashem created one versus the other. Everything in this world is counterbalanced. So if you have a godly soul, you have an animal soul. And if you have an animal soul, you have a godly soul. And any particular element or trait that you have in one, you will have in the other. And midway through chapter 6, the Alter Rebbe says as follows. V'chein, and these are the lines that the Rebbe references. V'chein, kol hadiburim v'chol hamachshavot asher lo la'Hashem hema v'lirtzono v'la'avodato. Says the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe that is. Any speech, words that a person says, or thoughts that a person has, which are not exclusively for Hashem and not exclusively directed towards serving Hashem, These two are powered by the animal soul and serve to strengthen negative egocentric forces. Says the Rebbe, says the Alter Rebbe, this is why we call the forces of negativity the other side. Pirush meaning to say, tzad acher she'ini tzad hakdusha, the other side that is not the side of holiness. Tzad hakdusha, we're holding right here for those that are following along. And the holy side includes only something, the only speech or thoughts that are actually from the holy side are only if there is a godly intent, a specific godly intent in this particular speech or action or thought. And the presence of Hashem only rests upon something that is completely nullified to him. Both in a literal sense, like an active sense, like the supernal angels, or even if the bittul, this submission to Hashem, is dormant. And what's an example of someone in whom the bittul, this submission to Hashem, is dormant? Like every single Jew down here, who has in his ability to be able, at least the potential, to be able to nullify himself completely to Hashem by giving up his life in martyrdom to Hashem. This is the last line here. And that's why our sages have told us that even if one person is sitting and studying Torah, the divine presence is there with him. And furthermore, on any group of 10 people, the divine presence rests. That's from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. But anything that is not completely nullified to Hashem, who rather perceives itself as something completely separate, a separate entity to Hashem, does not receive energy from Hashem. Rather, they are receiving energy from the forces of Klippa, the forces of Sitra Achra, the negative forces that there are in this world. Says the Rebbe, this is so relevant. All you need to do is dwell on this, and it will give you what was the lashon, what was the exact language of the Rebbe. You will find enough material to occupy your mind for hours and days. This is amazing stuff. Likewise, the Rebbe continues. The first 4 lines of page 19, okay, or on page 14, from the end of the 5th line to the 10th. Here we have another quote. The first quote is from chapter 5, in which the Alter Rebbe explains that studying Torah is the greatest fusion that a human being can have with the divine, can have with God, to be able to make his mind and Hashem himself, the divine presence itself, meld into one. The closest physical analogy that the Alter Rebbe brings is to someone who eats food and that food becomes part of his body. He digests it. After he discards the waste, the food that stays in him becomes part of his flesh and blood. Similarly, when we study Torah, it becomes part of who we are. And the exact lines that the Rebbe is referring to are Kach b'yediyat Torah. Similarly, when a person studies Torah, and he comprehends it in the soul of a person, he learns it properly in depth, in the depths of his mind, until it becomes grasped by his mind. It becomes unified with him. They become one. Says the Alter Rebbe, it becomes sustenance for his soul, just like food becomes sustenance for the body. Torah, when we study Torah, becomes sustenance for our soul. V'chayim b'kirba, and life inside of him. Mechaya chayim, from the source of all life, and the life of all life. Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the unlimited, blessed one, referring to Hashem. Hamelubash b'chachmata v'torah shebekirba, who is enclosed in this Torah that he has studied. Okay, let's keep going for now. We're not going to do the next quote. The Rebbe continues. In the same way, you will find some lines on each page which will inspire you to avat Hashem and yirat Hashem, to love God and to fear God. And the more you will think about these meaningful teachings, the higher you will rise spiritually. In the course of a letter, it is impossible to say more about it, but the Rashi HaYeshiva, which means the deans of your yeshiva, of your school, and senior Talmidim, elderly, more advanced disciples and students in the yeshiva that you're in, will surely help you if you ask them. This last point that the Rebbe makes, before the asking Rosh Yeshiva and senior students, which is clearly echoing the introduction to the Tanya, which the Rebbe referenced earlier, that if you don't find Tanya relevant to you, you should ask those that are well-versed in Tanya. Okay. But before that, the Rebbe makes a very specific point. There is a law in the laws of mikveh that if a person has immersed themselves in a mikveh completely, besides for their left pinky, whatever, the top of their left pinky, it's as if they are not completely immersed in the mikveh. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya and elsewhere explains that this halacha, this law about mikveh, applies also to someone who studies Torah and mitzvahs. If you're a nice, religious, wonderful Jew, you're keeping Torah, you're doing mitzvahs, etc., but you're only involving, let's say, your left hand, but not your right hand, you're not truly serving Hashem. Likewise, the Alter Rebbe continues, and this is one of the foundations of Tanya, if you're serving Hashem with your mind, with your hands, with your feet, with your everything, but you're not involving your heart, for example, because you don't love and fear Hashem, or maybe you're reserving a part of you to remain in allegiance to the material world, then says the Alter Rebbe, you're not fully serving Hashem. You have to be able to serve Hashem. When you do the mitzvah, you have to be doing it and present intellectually, present emotionally, feeling it and thinking it, and fully involved with your machshava, with your thoughts, with your dibur, with your speech, and with your ma'aseh, with your actions. All of this has to be involved in serving Hashem. Says the Rebbe. On every single page of the Tanya, you can find this. There is not a single page. The way the Rebbe explains this, and you'll find some lines on each page that will inspire you to love and fear Hashem. Because this is obviously the stated goal of the Tanya. So what's the problem? So now the Rebbe ends off with some words of encouragement. The important thing is not to be discouraged. For to learn Tanya is like learning any other profound subject. In the same way as when you begin Gemara, which is Talmud, or even Chumash, which is the 5 books of Moses, you cannot expect to delve very deeply in it as you will years later. So with the Tanya, you will gain depth as the time goes on, and your mind will grasp more and more of Hasidism. And I could say this from personal experience. Tanya is one of those books that I have revisited over and over and over again throughout my life. Learned it for the first time when I was like 13, 14 years old, right after my bar mitzvah. Probably thought I understood it then, but clearly didn't. Visited it again when I was in my teen years in yeshiva. Visited it again when my older years when I was single, in my early 20s. And then again after I got married. And then again as I started to teach it for the first time, to teach it to different people, you gain more and more and more insight into Tanya the more you learn it and the more advanced you are. I am pleased to hear that you are a madrich, which means a guide, a mentor, helping younger children to understand more of Yiddishkeit. Helping others understand is a segula, a good omen for God's help to give you too a deeper understanding. With the blessing of Talmud Torah B'Yirah Shamayim, which means to study Torah with fear of heaven. This is a letter that was dictated by the Rebbe and written by Rabbi Nissen Mendel, who was the Rebbe's secretary, and that is the first letter that I want to share today. The second letter I want to talk about is on page, for those that have it printed out, on page 11. And it's called, Can I Learn Tanya If I'm Not Religious? And in this letter, the Rebbe speaks to a question that I think many of you might have. In other words, many of the people that live here in Pasadena that didn't necessarily grow up religious, maybe you don't even consider yourself religious today. And often as you study Tanya, it has language that seems very much geared towards religious people. Loving Hashem, fearing Hashem, meditations to put on tefillin, meditations for keeping Shabbos. Can I study Tanya if I'm not ready to do all that? If I didn't bite the bullet yet, I'm not keeping every single mitzvah, can I still study Tanya? The Rebbe writes, by the grace of God, the 25th of Elul, 5736. This is Tafshin Lamed Vav, which corresponds to the English year of 1976. Brooklyn, New York, Mrs. whoever it is. This was a woman from Ferrara, Italy. The Rebbe opens blessing and greeting. I received your letter. By the way, I should mention that that's one of the ways of knowing of a letter of the Rebbe, whether it's to a male or a female. The Rebbe always starts with a male with greeting and blessing, and then to a female with blessing and greeting. Interesting random tidbit. This is a letter. This is a class where we're going to be learning a lot of letters of the Rebbe, so I figured I would point it out. Says the Rebbe, I received your letter of March 9th, 1976, in which you ask if it would be proper for you, not being religious, to read Tanya and similar books. I presume you mean not just reading, but studying in depth. No doubt you know that one of the basics of Judaism is, as our sages formulated it, that every Jew has a share in the world to come. As it is written, being a branch of my planting, the work of my hands to be glorified. The difference is only in regard to the share, whether it be large or small, and whether one attains it with greater or lesser effort. But our Torah, called Torah's Chaim, which means the Torah of life, because it is both our guide in this life and the source of everlasting life, makes it clear that every Jew, man or woman, has a share in the world to come. Okay, so far you established that every Jew has a share in the world to come. More or less, depends on how much they invest in their Judaism, but every Jew has a share in the world to come. What is the relevance of this, the Tanya? Says the Rebbe. The Tanya, as the author states in the title page, okay, so Hasidim have a custom, have a tradition, that you don't just study Tanya, you also study the title page of Tanya. What is the title page of Tanya? Let me show it to you. Oh, actually, in this one, they'll probably have it with all the commentary. I need a regular one. Hold on. We'll see if they have it here. Yeah. They have the title page. They don't have it. Oh, here. No, here. They have an image of it. Okay. This is the title page of Tanya. Now, obviously, in this version, there's a lot of commentary on the side. But what you see right here, this is the title page of Tanya. Okay? The title page of Tanya basically lays out the origin story of the Tanya and the mission statement of the Tanya. What is the origin story? In very brief, I'm not going to read it now, but the origin story of the Tanya is that it comes from the writings of the Kabbalah, specifically the writings of the Arizal, etc., and from the teachings of the Rebbes that preceded the Alter Rebbe, namely the Baal Shem Tov and the Mezritcher Maggid, the Maggid of Mezrich. Okay, beautiful. But then it continues after the origin story and lays out the mission statement for the Tanya. What does it say? It says that it is based on a verse in the Torah which says, that it's very, very close for you to attain the love and fear of Hashem in your heart, in your mouth and in your heart to do it. And the whole purpose of the Tanya is to explain how it's very, very close to you. Okay? So now the Rebbe quotes this. The Tanya, as the author states in the title page, is based on the verse. The thing is near unto you, in your mouth and in your heart to do it. In other words, in speech, thought, and action. But he immediately cautions that the road is a long and a short one. Not a short and long one, a long and short one. Meaning also that it may be long for some and short for others, but everyone will get there sooner or later. Continues the Rebbe. In light of this preface, needless to say, the Tanya pertains and relates to every Jew. And moreover, it is near, comprehensible, and indeed highly conducive to an actual implementation in daily life. Fascinating. So to this woman who said, I am not religious, and therefore I feel like I cannot relate to the Tanya, the Rebbe is saying, no. The Alter Rebbe had you in mind when he wrote the Tanya. So why do I feel like maybe it's not for me? However, continues the Rebbe, God has given everyone free choice of action. And it is this is based on Maimonides, right? Maimonides, in one of his 13 principles of faith, writes that we have the choice to choose between good and evil, and therefore we're rewarded based on our actions of doing good or evil. So everybody has freedom of choice when it comes to choosing the right or wrong thing to do. And it is his desire that the choice be made in the right direction out of one's own free will. In other words, he could have forced us to do whatever it is that he wants us to do, right? But he wanted it to come from us. Yet while presenting this freedom of choice, God gives the assurance that it is near unto you, not only in word and thought, but also in actual deed. This is what the author explains in his book, where he also provides guidelines to the desired goal. He also explains why it is certain that every Jew will attain it, sooner or later, except that for one the road may be longer and for another shorter. Inasmuch as you state in your letter that you are a professor of pedagogic sciences, it is confidently hoped that you will study the Tanya without prejudice. And then you will see the truth of the author's ideas. In other words, you can't just study it as like an intellectual idea to see whether he's right or not and with a critical view or whatever. No, you have to give it a real fighting chance to actually be able to change. Thus, you will find it rewarding and beneficial not only for yourself, but being a teacher and educator, you will want to share it with others. This is an additional factor that will contribute to the success of your said study that will help shorten the road. In other words, when you have in mind for yourself and to help others, it will help you relate with it in a shorter way. It won't take as long. I would like to add a further point. Where one has the opportunity and ability to influence others in the right direction, the time element is of the essence. If you can teach Tanya to others, you have to get involved. For with regard to oneself, a person may think that he will make up tomorrow what he misses today. But with regard to another person, one cannot be sure that the other person may be reached tomorrow, or that he will be as receptive tomorrow as he is today. With reference to a bracha, it is customary to remember one in prayer by mentioning the full Hebrew name. I guess this woman also requested a bracha, a blessing of some sort. Says the Rebbe, it is customary to remember one in prayer by mentioning the full Hebrew name together with the mother's Hebrew name. If you will let me know those names, I will remember you in prayer for God's blessing and all your needs. At this time, before Rosh Hashanah, I extend to you and yours best wishes for a happy and pleasant year, materially and spiritually, with blessings, the Rebbe's signature. These are the two letters that I wanted to explore today. And I hope you found them as meaningful and as powerful and as impactful as I found them. The Rebbe is making a point. You don't have to be religious. You don't have to be academic. You don't have to be already inclined to these ideas. You just have to open the book of the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe had you in mind, and he wants you to try and give it a fighting chance. Actually allow the ideas to seep in. And then you will find not only is the Tanya relatable, but the Tanya actually is more than relatable. It is transformative. I'll conclude with the following story. I know we're over time, but today is the 19th day of Kislev, and definitely we had to give that a proper shout out at the beginning. Hopefully next week we'll actually finally make it to our 20-minute segment. which is what I have in mind. So I wanted to conclude with the following story. There was a famous mashpia, a Hasidic mentor in the yeshiva in Lubavitch, in the original Chabad yeshiva in the town of Lubavitch back in the former Soviet Union, whose name was Rebbe Michal Bliner and Michal den Alter. And he often would talk about these ideas of teaching Hasidus to others and relating to the ideas of Hasidus, etc. And at Farbrengens, when he was inspiring the students, one of his favorite stories, parables, if you will, to bring out the idea that Hasidus is relatable to every single one of us was the following. He said that in the old shtetls, they used to have a melamed, which means a person who would teach their students. They themselves, the farmers necessarily out near the shtetls, out in the farmlands of Russia, they didn't necessarily know how to read. They wanted their children to grow up to read Hebrew and to be able to, be able to study Torah and to know what it means to be Jewish. So they would hire a melamed to come and teach by them. And this melamed was by default also the person who read letters. If they got correspondence, which happened once in a blue moon, if they got a letter, he would read them their letters. So one day, a letter arrives in a particular farm, and it's from whatever, Moscow, one of the big cities, whatever it is. And the letter is written to a farmer, but the melamed wasn't in town, so they waited a couple of days, a couple of weeks till he came back. And he comes back, and they tell him, "This is a letter I received. Can you read it to me?" And he starts to read the letter, and it turns out that the content of the letter is saying that this particular farmer, his father had passed away. The news was delayed. It was quite a few days later. He's hearing this third hand, but you can imagine that this news, right? Because first was written in a letter, then the melamed is reading it, but still he hears this news and he starts to cry. And Rebbe Michal Bliner, this mentor in yeshiva, would ask a simple question. He would say, "Why is it that there's an interesting fact going on here? The melamed, the teacher, is reading the letter. He's reading, 'Your father has passed,' but he's not crying. The farmer, who's actually not reading the letter, he's only hearing it third hand, he starts crying when he hears that his father passed. Why is that? The obvious answer is because of the way that they comprehend these words. When the melamed, when the teacher reads these words, he reads, 'Your father has passed,' but in his mind, he's translating, 'Not my father, his father.' It's not talking about me, it's talking about him. Whereas the farmer is doing the exact opposite. Even though the letter says, 'Your father,' and it seemingly is being read by the melamed, it seems to be talking to him, still he's translating it as, no, my father. He's taking it personal. Rebbe Michal Bliner would always end off and he would say that it's important that when we read Chassidus, and I'll apply it to today's lesson specifically, when we study Tanya, it's important that we read it as if it is our father. If you read the entire Tanya, I promise you can read the entire Tanya and not be changed one iota. How? Just always translate it as talking about somebody else. The Tanya is talking about somebody with anger managements. You translate it in your head. I know so-and-so, he has anger management issues. If he wants to deal with his anger management issues, here's the Alter Rebbe's advice for him. And you'll study it as an academic subject. And it won't have any relevance to your life because it's not talking to me, it's talking to somebody else. It's his father, not my father. So Michal Bliner would always end up and he would say, as Melend Chassidus, when we learn Chassidus, when we study the teachings of Chassidus, which we were gifted on this day of the 19th day of Kislev, we have to learn it as his dying tate, like it's talking to you, it's your father. It's talking to you when the Alter Rebbe says that somebody is struggling with something and he has advice for that person. You to translate it, I am struggling with that. And when I struggle with that, the Alter Rebbe has advice for me. And that is the way that Tanya will never be unrelatable to us ever again. I want to thank you all for joining us. With this, we'll conclude the Rebbe's Lens, our weekly webcast exploring the Rebbe's perspective on life. And today, we spoke about why we should study Tanya and how Tanya can be relatable to us. And I look forward to seeing you all next week at exactly the same time, 1 p.m. every Tuesday. Next week, we're going to be tackling the subject of the public menorahs. And we'll read a few letters of the Rebbe with regards to everybody knows the Chabad loves public menorahs. We'll learn a little bit of the Rebbe's correspondence to that. We won't get into the whole story, but at least a little bit of it. Thank you all for joining us.